Our good friend Mark Feinsand is joining us in studio. Congratulations, man.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
You mentioned this is your third book, and you're hitting it right in the sweet spot. Father's Day is right around the corner. I imagine this would make a great gift for any Yankee fan out there.
Absolutely. Any Yankees fan, any baseball fan, really. It's, you can't tell the history of baseball without talking about the Yankees. This goes all the way back to the days of Babe Ruth, all the way through current day. So, it's a fun look at the the history of baseball's most celebrated team.
Yeah, they are one of the more, they're arguably the most iconic franchise in all of American sports. I mean, you could put the Dallas Cowboys, the LA Lakers. By the way, there are a lot of Yankee fans that are fans of the Cowboys and the Lakers, but that's another story.
Different conversation.
Why is it that this franchise resonates with such a broad, vast amount of people, not just people in the Northeast, but you go to the West Coast, down south, there's Yankee fans everywhere?
I think it's the stars they've had over the course of their lifetime. You start with Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig, you go into Joe DiMaggio, Mickey Mantle, Yogi Berra, Reggie Jackson, Don Mattingly, Derek Jeter, Aaron Judge. They've had some of the game's biggest stars for over 100 years. So, in another baseball market, they may, have a team to root for, but there are a lot of markets in this country that don't have their own baseball team.
Correct.
The Yankees are on national TV a lot. People get to watch them. You talk to people who don't live in baseball markets, and chances are they're either Yankee fans or Braves fans because they grew up watching the Braves on TBS. But the Yankees are, that's that iconic logo, the pinstripes, and the big stars, right? You can talk to anybody in this country, whether they know baseball or not, they can tell you who Derek Jeter is, right? They might not be able to tell you who Mike Trout is. They know who Derek Jeter is. So I think that's a big part of it.
You've broken this book up into kind of a unique way, specific chapters. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so trying to tell the history of this team, if you're going to tell the entire history, it would have been a 4,000-page book. I wasn't writing a 4,000-page book. 388 pages was more than enough. But we tried to look at it as what are the aspects of this franchise that have made it so successful and popular and had them thrive over the course of over a century. So we looked at the architects, the managers, the GMs, the owners, the people who put together the team and ran the team. We looked at the captains, because obviously there are some very big names from Gehrig to Munson to Jeter, and including some other guys. Willie Randolph, first African-American captain. I talked to him for a while for the book. Told me about, sort of taking that job in the shadow of Munson's death. He was obviously very close with Thurman, so that was pretty emotional for him. We looked at the rivalries. Obviously, the Red Sox, there's 2 chapters on the Red Sox because that was not, you couldn't just tell the history of the Red Sox-Yankees rivalry in one. There was sort of that 70s anger, the brawls, the Munson-Fisk era, and then you obviously had the early
2003, 2004,
Pedro and the Joe Torre teams. We looked at the acquisitions, right? The Yankees drafted and developed a lot of their players, but they've also brought in some really big-name players from the outside.
Catfish Hunter,
Mike Mussina, Jason Giambi, Hideki Matsui. A lot of, now look, I have to admit, I skewed a lot more to the last 40 years of history than I did to the original because I couldn't get Babe Ruth on the phone. So, it was tough. I tried.
Right.
But you look at, Roger Maris was a huge acquisition for them.
Right.
A trade. So, Paul O'Neill. So, we looked at some of the guys who came in from elsewhere and left their mark in New York. So, it was an interesting way to kind of go about it, be able to tell a whole bunch of different stories. The Game Winners is another chapter. Obviously, some iconic moments in team history. So we tried to take it from a few different angles and not just tell the same old stories. There are some of those stories in there because you can't tell the history of the Yankees talking about Reggie Jackson's 3 home runs or things like that. But we tried to incorporate some new stuff in there, catch up with some old Yankees and pick their brains about a whole bunch of things.
You live in this area. You're very familiar with this team. You were on the Yankees beat for a while, so you are very familiar with this franchise. During the course of this book, what did you learn or discover about this team that maybe you weren't completely aware of?
I don't remember ever hearing this before. When I was talking to Joe Torre, who was gracious enough to write the foreword for the book for me as well, we were talking about him getting hired. He's talked about getting hired a lot. Now, maybe it was because I was in college and I didn't sort of recall this at the time. He was actually offered the GM job before he was offered the managerial job.
Wow.
And I started thinking about the sliding doors effect of what would have happened if Joe Torre had taken the GM job and not the manager's job. Who knows who the manager would have been? He would have been the GM instead of Bob Watson. Maybe Brian Cashman doesn't become the GM next. there are so many things that could have happened with this team and that dynasty if Torre had taken the GM job rather than wait it out. He had, gotten fired from 3 spots as a manager. He wanted to manage again. He didn't want the executive job. He had a newborn baby, and he knew that being the GM of the Yankees under George Steinbrenner in 1995-96, there were no days off to go spend with your family. As the manager, you have the offseason to kind of go to Hawaii and chill out. So he held out, and eventually their other choices didn't take the job. He got offered the job, and the rest was history.
You can't really tell the story of the Yankees' history without mentioning the Steinbrenner family, specifically George Steinbrenner. What does he mean to the overall story of this franchise and just how he changed the culture and the expectations, really? Because when he took over, the Yankees that we see now that's not what was going on back then.
No, definitely not. They had some losing years. He came in and, he wasn't as bombastic right away, but it didn't take very long for him to become the big figure that he did. And he really had the impact on the Yankees and on baseball in general. A lot of the rules that were put into place in terms of free agency, in terms of luxury taxes and things like that, were put in to try to stop George Steinbrenner from just going on these wild spending sprees. He also impacted the media landscape by signing that big deal with MSG Network back in the 80s. It was the first team that really took advantage of local media rights to gain a financial advantage over other teams. George, what I did for the George Steinbrenner chapter was I talked to everybody I could find who knew him, who worked for him, who played for him, and tell me your best Steinbrenner story. And so in their own words, people gave me their favorite Steinbrenner stories. There are some real good ones in there. And then I talked to Hal and did a chapter with Hal Steinbrenner about being the son of George Steinbrenner and taking over this team and how his style is different. It's an interesting contrast between father and son.
Lastly, we'll get you out of here on this one for this particular segment. They obviously haven't won a World Series since 2009, but trending right now for a deep postseason run, the 2022 Yankees.
Yeah, obviously they're having a fantastic season. Pitching has been unbelievable. Aaron Judge has been even better. And a 13-year drought doesn't seem very long to most franchises out there. For the Yankees and their fan base, it seems like an eternity.
Yeah.
It's certainly setting up to be a special year, but as we know, and I remember seeing this with some of those Torre teams in the early 2000s, you could have the best team all regular season, you run into a hot team like they did in 2002 with the Angels, and anything can happen.
Point.
So, that 2009 team, still very special with the core 4, Sabathia, Burnett, Swisher, Teixeira, new guard, old guard. That was my last book, so who knows, maybe if they win a title in 2022, maybe Brian Hoke and I will get together and write another one.
Well, the new book is called The Franchise, a complete look at the history of the New York Yankees. Yeah, hold that bad boy up there. It's available. It's out today, and it's available where you get books, wherever you get all your books. So congratulations, Mark. Good luck with the book.